We are here to discuss and explore ways to become more empowered. So we're not buffeted by all these events happening in the outer world, so to speak. And what does it depend on? Well, it depends on our inner world, on how we are on the inside. So in other words, we will be learning today how to use energy awareness, and I will be sharing some of the practices that will help with that so that you feel more empowered, more confident, more centered. And when you are more centered and more confident, events of your life don't have as much effect on you. In other words, they may still affect you in one way or another, still matter to some extent, but it will not throw you off balance. And that means you will not be struggling. You will not be happy. You're not going to be grappling to just maintain some kind of dynamic balance while events are happening to you. In a sense, we will learn how to change the perception of things. And instead of things being done to us, we start looking at the ways how we create or manifest events in our lives. That's right. Manifesting events in our lives is what empowered people do. What separates people who are empowered from those who are not so empowered or disempowered? Well, by and large, disempowered people feel like a victim. They feel like things are being done to them. We don't want to feel like victims, right? I hope you don't. As a matter of fact, I know that you don't because I've spoken to thousands of people for many years about the subject matter. And I don't think I've ever come across any one person who would say they wanted to feel like a victim. So how do we make it so that we begin to recognize how much we are the captain of our own ship, and also how to become mindful as to how we are steering the ship? We develop the ability to make decisions based on much more intelligent way of decision making than the way that most people use in their daily lives. We also develop the ability to make decisions on both micro scale, just simple movements. We decide whether to move this way or that way on the basis of energy resonance instead of some preconceived ideas. But then we also expand to macro level. How do we do things in our lives in general? Who do we relate to? Who do we choose to establish relationships with? Or who do we do business with? Or if we are doing any political, how do we make it so that it would be meaningful and mindful? And that basically means that we are learning how to develop mastery. Mastery of life, mastery of our own destiny, and who wouldn't want that? So, on this note, let's jump right into the principles that lead to mastery. Before we jump into the principles, let's just check with everyone if you guys hear me well. If you feel like you have any challenges with technology, please feel free to raise your hand and let me know if you have challenges. If you hear me well, just nod your head. Obviously, I would love to see your faces, so feel free to turn your cameras on. I would love to be able to see those nodding heads. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Nancy, for letting me know that you can see me. So what we're doing is we are developing mastery. How do we develop mastery? How do we accomplish that which most people consider really difficult and do that with ease? That's the definition of mastery, by the way. We learn how to develop the awareness of energy flow, and then we learn how to be in the flow. When you are in the flow, you experience the most profound sense of wellness and well-being. You're not struggling against the flow of things, against life. And when you're not struggling, you're not suffering or less likely to suffer. You also are less likely to cause suffering to others. So you exercising one of the important values that many of us hold up, and that is the value of compassion, or at least a deeper sense of empathy for other people. And we also develop the ability to make our decisions based on the sense of flow. In other words, if we are at any juncture where we need to make a decision, and we can check, well, is the flow going this way or is it not? If it's not going this way, deciding to go in the direction against the flow would obviously lead to some degree of discontent and suffering. Basically, we shot ourselves in the foot. If we choose to decide to go in the direction of flow, it doesn't mean that we completely just give up and be blown by the wind wherever the wind blows. We can navigate. We can get to the destination that we want to get, even though the wind blows in some other directions. As long as we are not going straight against the wind, we can tack. And basically, that's like sailing a boat. We use the power of the wind, power of the flow, but not struggling. We put it to good use. That's something that most people find quite controversial, or sometimes even challenging to comprehend how to do that, especially. Well, one of the things that we learn to do is first to recognize when we are feeling the flow and what it feels like. And we do this by using our own body as the gauge. We use our own physical body in order to feel whether or not we are more on the flow or less in the flow. Just earlier this morning, I was working with a group of private students who were receiving a coaching session. And in the context of that session, some of you are actually here today. We already touched upon a really interesting concept, being at the right place in the right time. How do you know that you're in the right place or at the right place in the right time? One of the things that you can feel is how much more relaxed you are. If you are tense, if your breathing is stifled and rapid and stressed, that's a pretty clear indication that you are not quite in the flow, isn't it? So we look at ourselves and check, how is my breathing? How is my heart rate? How is my muscle tone throughout the body? If I'm cringing, if my breathing is stifled or my heart rate is beating fast, well, that's a pretty clear sign that I'm struggling against something. I may not recognize what I'm struggling against. There may be some mental images or thoughts that may be spinning in my mind that I'm struggling with. That's something we need to address. And we also may be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And the body gives us the signal, hey, something is not quite right. The energy of this place doesn't resonate with the energy of the organism that we are. If the energy of our organism doesn't resonate with the place or with the zeitgeist, it's the energy of time, or the people that we're meeting with, for example, you're at the party and you're hanging out with some person that you really can't stand. How does that make you feel? You probably would be cringing, right? It probably would be like, I want to get away from this person, or how can I wrap up this conversation as quickly as possible so I can move on? Or imagine listening to music and turning on the piece of music that you really can't stand. How long would you be willing to listen to it? Probably very, very short length of time, because you'll be like, okay, I'm done listening to this. Let's move on. But often we don't pay attention to this obvious feedback that we receive from our own body. Why? Because we don't pay attention to ourselves. If we pay enough attention to ourselves, of course, we'll be able to receive these messages that the body is trying to convey. But if we disregard these messages by not paying attention to ourselves, no matter how much the body is screaming, we are deaf to it. As a matter of fact, screaming the body turns into chronic pain or other chronic issues that eventually lead to massive health problems. This is an obvious chronic development of health problems that a lot of people overlook or don't pay attention to. Of course, they're going to not get better, they're going to get worse. And when we start paying attention, sometimes it doesn't feel pleasant because we discover that there is some pain or some other sense of discomfort. So what do? Often we just simply feel like, I don't want to deal with that now. And so again, we disconnect or dissociate from ourselves, from our own bodies. And what do we do in order to make it so that we would be not disconnected? Or in other words, how do we reconnect? Well, we just simply need to get over that an acceptance. Basically, that's the matter of acceptance. We have to accept that something is not going to be comfortable. When you pay attention to things happening inside of yourself, some things you will really like, and some things you may not like so much. Instead of just pushing away or running away from them or sweeping them under the rug, we learn to look at them dispassionately, kind of like from a third party's perspective. Isn't it interesting how there is this hang up I have? Or isn't it interesting how I have this chronic fear of something? Okay, well, if I have a chronic fear, if I have a chronic attitude towards something or someone that turns into anger or rage, or if I have a low self-esteem and I chronically feel depressed or disconnected, what do? Most people say, well, if I have low self-esteem, I need to boost self-esteem. If I am chronically tense, well, I need to learn how to relax. Of course, that would be really smart. But an even smarter thing to do would be to actually take 100% responsibility for it first. Nobody is making me self-conscious. Nobody is making me tense or stiff. I'm doing it to myself. If I take full responsibility for my own conditions, if I take full responsibility for the events in my life, it's very empowering. I'm no longer a victim of somebody doing something to me. Now, what happens is something really interesting. Then you have freedom of choice. You have freedom to keep doing that which led you to the same results that you have been experiencing, or discover some other alternative ways of being. If you keep doing the same thing but expect different results, well, that's a sign of insanity. So I invite you to explore sane ways of being, discovering new ways of being that would not lead to the same results. It would lead to more positive results. How do we discover such ways? We experiment. It's a universal principle. I can apply it to every part of the body. I can apply it to every relationship. I can apply it to every business communication or anything else. It literally is that universal. We experiment. We want to operate on the basis of evidence-based practice, rather than faith-based practice. Now, a lot of people put a lot of stock in faith. And of course, there are religions that teach us that we need to have faith. And then we have all kinds of doctrines that we get indoctrinated into that we take on faith. But instead of taking things in faith, we actually want to learn how to operate on the basis of evidence gathered through exploration. And once this evidence is sufficient, then we can make decisions based on a reality rather than some preconceived ideas. You see, it's kind of an interesting thing that we as humans have tendency to make decisions based on labels. For example, the most basic labels that we all know about, the labels of good and bad. For thousands of years, all organized religions, or most of the organized religions, have been operating exactly on this type of dualistic way of looking at things. So there are some divine forces, the forces of good, that we feel like they are on the one side of the equation, and there are the forces of bad or evil that are on the opposite side of the equation. And they are in this perennial struggle against each other. Well, as long as there is this perennial struggle, it means that there's going to be struggle inside of ourselves. In other words, there is no way to experience inner peace if we believe in this kind of dualistic way of looking at things, such as good or bad. And that is the standard operating procedure for the majority of humankind, and has been for a long, long time. So we actually are on the cutting edge of conscious human evolution, because we are learning how to transcend this old stereotype, how to expand beyond this box that we've kind of talked ourselves into, and cannot talk ourselves out of this box, or can talk ourselves out of the paper bag, as they say. We learn how to develop a new, much more intelligent way to make decisions, instead of based on these dualistic black and white labels of good and bad. What's the alternative? What can we base our decisions that would be more intelligent? Well, luckily enough, that's exactly what we've been talking about. That's energy resonance. Perception of resonance gives you much more authentic way of recognizing that you are in alignment with this particular path or course of action or a way of thinking, or a particular person or a group of people or anything. Basically, anything in this world is made of energy. And there are different energies associated with different ways of being, and different places and different groups of people and whatnot. And so if we resonate with one or another, we can feel it. And we can feel it authentically with our own body, which will not lie. It will not try to talk you into something that is not really true. Your body actually will reveal very quickly and efficiently what you resonate with, if you just pay attention to it. And that is going to be authentic, because it doesn't matter what some people may tell you, what you should be resonating with. They don't know. You may not even have any idea what you're going to resonate with until you actually pay attention to the feedback that the body provides. And then you can also check, well, this is how I feel about this, but what about other alternatives? We don't want to just test once and make a decision based on just one result, because, well, everything is relative. So we need to actually compare how different things feel. And when we make our decisions based on this comparison, it's going to be a much more intelligent and authentic decision than any decision made on the basis of labels. But what's interesting about it is that not only will it be authentic to you in regards to other people, it's also going to be authentic to you in regards to how you're going to be tomorrow or the day after or next year. Because what happened yesterday might have been associated with a certain way energies coalesced and manifested the events of yesterday. The way that you were yesterday may be different from the way you were today. If you are different today from the way you were yesterday, well, that's the reason that you're going to be different tomorrow from today. And if you make your decisions based on resonance today, I encourage you to test again tomorrow to make sure that you are still in resonance with your course of action. When you do this consistently, it becomes a habit. It becomes an ongoing practice of checking, how does my body feel when I think about this particular way of being or course of action or this person or this event. It literally trains you to pay attention to yourself. And guess what? Where attention goes, energy flows. If you develop the habit of paying attention to yourself, guess where the energy flows? To you. It flows back into your system. Basically, it starts circulating more and more vigorously through your organism. You experience greater vitality. You experience that flow within as well as flow without. Who wouldn't want that, right? But that's not all. When you feel that energy circulating, it actually provides you a tremendous amount of empowerment. It makes you feel more empowered because then you can apply this energy to whatever you need to do. In other words, that is the secret behind a lot of macrocosmic orbit and other type of practices that are dedicated to running energy through your system. Macrocosmic orbit talks about the Dumai and the Renmai, the conception and governing vessel in the back, conception vessel in the front. They're running the energy through these channels over and over again. If there are any blockages, most Qigong teachers say, well, you just need to break through these blockages, just push the energy through it. To which I always say, look, maybe we need to do something a little bit more intelligent. First of all, the energy knows how to flow. You don't need to push the energy through the blocks. Let the energy find its way around your blockages. But you dedicate your attention to removing the root causes of these blockages. Why are these blockages here in the first place? If you don't remove them, you just push the energy through, guess what? You will backslide because the issue is still there. The block is still there. If you're not consciously pushing the energy through it, well, as soon as you stop doing this exercise, you will backslide. And trying to push the energy is also a really challenging thing because energy flows where the laws of nature tell it to flow. And we only know a tiny fraction of these laws of nature, as you know. And there's a huge amount of knowledge that we don't have in our possession, that we don't understand many of the laws of nature. We haven't discovered them yet. In other words, what we know is just a tiny tip of the iceberg as compared to what we don't know. And that huge part of the iceberg that's underwater, that sustains and supports that little tip, has all our resources, has all our human potential within it. We need to learn how to connect with that deeper part of ourselves, tap into those resources, and discover how to manifest the potential that we have. How do we do that? Any ideas? Well, I have an idea. We do it by establishing a real clear interface between the part of the iceberg that is the tip, what we know, and the huge part of the iceberg that's underwater, representing what we don't know. That interface connecting these two parts of the iceberg and providing communication between them is called awareness. Awareness is like a screen. As you can imagine, there's this thin layer of ice separating the top of the iceberg from the bottom of it. If this part of this ice is clear, you can actually look through it and you can see what's going on down there. That awareness is the faculty of consciousness that allows us to get to know that which used to be unknown. Without awareness, obviously, we cannot get to know that which we didn't know. And that awareness has a certain prerequisite. And we've been talking about this prerequisite all this time since the beginning of this session today. This prerequisite is attention. There is no awareness without attention. We cannot become aware of something we don't pay attention to. So that is the reason why we learn how to pay attention to ourselves, how to develop the awareness of certain feedback that we get from our bodies, because we learn how to become aware of ourselves. Self-awareness opens the possibility for getting to know ourselves a lot deeper, discovering our human potential, and learning how to actualize it. And there is a prerequisite for attention, by the way. And that prerequisite for attention is something tricky and is going to be the #1 homework for each and every one of us. It's called acceptance. That's a really hard one, isn't it? Practicing acceptance is often challenging for most folks because they have certain preconceived ideas of how things should be. But mind you, it's because there's still this belief in the labels, good and bad, what we've been taught by other people, what we've been indoctrinated to believe in. How do we know how things should be? It's a figment of imagination. It's a myth. If we recognize it as such, if we look at it like it's a dream and become lucid in this dream, become awake to the dreamlike nature of this belief that we think we know what's right, well, then we can play with it. We don't take it too personally. We don't take it too seriously. We don't get attached to it. And we can actually get creative. We don't have to just reignite. We don't have to be indoctrinated in somebody else's dreams. We can get creative with our own dreaming because we realize we are the ones who are dreaming right now. We are capable of being more creative because we are the creators of our own dreams. If we pursue our own dreams, then we become happy because we start manifesting and living our dreams. If we pursue somebody else's dreams, I don't know anyone who would become happy as a result of pursuing somebody else's dreams. It's usually a distraction or simply a waste of our time. We can help other people manifest their dreams. And the best way to help others manifest their dreams is by being a role model of living our own dreams. Oh, that's a really interesting one, isn't it? We have to walk the talk. We learn how to manifest and live our own dreams so that we can help other people manifest and live theirs. Now, the more people will help manifest and live their dreams, the more they will help us manifest ours. So there is certain reciprocity happening. It happens energetically and completely unconsciously. We don't have to have the tit for tat, arrangements with people. Okay, I will help you manifest your dream, but you sign on a dotted line agreement that you will help me manifest mine afterwards. It's karma. It just happens automatically. But what's interesting about it is that we learn how to first manifest ours before we can help anyone else. And how do we learn how to manifest our dreams? We need to get creative. We need to pay attention to the dreams, first of all, have a certain degree of acceptance of ourselves and what's happening in our consciousness so that we can be attentive to it. Once we are attentive to it, we can learn a great deal. Hence, awareness leads to developing greater and greater knowledge. With that knowledge, we can apply this knowledge to tap into the resources that would allow us to manifest and live our dreams. Now, this is usually the point where somebody's supposed to raise the hand and say, wait a moment, but how do we find those resources that would help us manifest and live our dreams, right? Does anyone have this question? Okay, well, I imagine that you have the question. I will help find this answer to it. The answer is actually already what we talked about. We talked about exploration and experimentation and energy testing. as we test our energy resonance, we find the appropriate resources. If we don't test, the likelihood of finding the appropriate resources is going to be slim to none. Makes sense, right? I see Christopher raised a hand. And feel free to unmute yourself, turn the camera on, and ask any questions you have. Christopher.
I wasn't able to turn my camera on for some reason, but anyway, I was hoping to get an answer maybe on how do you deal with your personality to keep holding the dream.
Personality that keep holding back so that the dream doesn't manifest?
Yeah, to tell you that you can't do something other, or you get even something showing up in your life where it tries to drag you back to the same old stuff that you don't want. You're trying to work on something that you're trying to dream and day and night or whatever. Tell yourself that you can do it, you know.
Right. Well, I really appreciate your question, Christopher. And the answer is really interesting. Personality is often not what is really holding you back. If we consider that this is like a mask that we all wear, we're not really revealing our true self. We're wearing a mask. That personality is basically how we're being perceived or how we portray ourselves to the world. And that is basically not who we really are. Now, there is also the inner layer of mask that actually fits the face, so to speak. That's called identity. That's who we think we are. And that's not necessarily the same as a personality. If there is any discrepancy, often there is some discontent or struggle. In other words, if you think that you are a good person and others think that you are a bad person, well, there's definitely going to be some discontent there. Once we let go of these labels of good and bad and start developing the energy-based way of checking with resonance, then we start looking at what traits of our character would be particularly helpful in manifesting the dream, and which traits may be not so helpful, and which traits may be undermining our ability to manifest and live our dreams. And like you said, we basically have to first pay attention to ourselves and go through some self-study, check out which of our traits are helpful and beneficial, and create a list of them. Literally, I'm not joking, just writing them down. And not necessarily will they be lined up in the most optimal way from the very first time you try to write them down. In other words, some traits may end up being on top of the list when they're not really high priorities. They're not really that important to you, or maybe you would like to actually let go of them. So you will have an opportunity to reevaluate your traits of the character, reevaluate your values in a sense. And that's something that most people never do in their lives. Once you do it, you will feel much more congruent. In other words, if there are certain values or certain traits that you feel are more important and you want to prioritize them, well, let's create a new list and let's put those traits way on top. The second most important one, well, that's going to be the second on the list. The third one, fourth one, so on and so forth. That reorganization of your own traits is something that is so easy to do, just simply writing it down on a piece of paper or on a tablet or whatever. But then you actually begin to identify how you want to be, how do you need to be in order to live your dreams. You see, if we are operating on some unconscious programming that has been instilled in our minds through our upbringing, education, and indoctrination, religion, and what have you, we are not in charge of our own resources. In other words, we often rely on some resources that are not particularly reliable or that are not even helpful. What we actually need to do in this case is to restructure our sense of identity. In other words, we decide who we choose to be, who we need to be in order to be able to manifest and live our dreams. As you reprioritize and reorganize your sense of identity, then you learn how to actually live into it. You know, they say fake it before you make it. Well, you don't fake it, you actually walk the talk. Don't just fake it and talk the talk. Literally, see how you can walk the talk, how you embody these traits that you prioritized. Once they are at the high level of priority, and you believe that they are in alignment with your high priority values, actually it will be easy to manifest them, because it's going to be the most natural thing for you to give more attention to that which is high importance to you. It's just we don't know consciously which traits to support, which traits to give attention to. So we often give attention to those traits of our character that are not particularly helpful, and empower them by doing so. And so that perpetuates the same kind of old stereotypical sabotage that we've been doing to ourselves. So if we let go of that sabotage and we start consciously reinventing ourselves, something really amazing happens. You eliminate a lot of internal struggle, because you will not have the competing values or the conflicting values in your system anymore. And that internal struggle is where most people waste tremendous amount of energy. So once you stop wasting energy, you will have plenty of energy to put to good use. You will be able to apply it to something that deserves that attention, such as a manifestation of your dreams, without the internal friction or sabotage that used to hold you back. Does it make sense, Christopher? Did I answer your question?
Yes, it does. It's just some of the terminology is a little different than what I've learned. So I'm just, like you were kind of saying earlier about getting your body to line up and being congruent. I'm kind of just keep going over that and make it more clear for me to hold it. I respect a lot what you have to say over these last few weeks. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. And if you have any questions about terminology, feel free to ask now. I will be happy to clarify anything.
Okay. See, the mask I would associate with the personality, and we have multiple personalities like they do in psychology. You know, some person gets mad and they stay mad and they're foaming the mouth, and the next moment they're a genius or something. That's what I would kind of claim it a mask is.
Right.
And in the pagan world, they put a mask on to create a different change in their belief system. So they do it at Christmas time or the winter time or something like that. So that's and I looked at this a little bit before. I probably should do it like supposedly Napoleon wrote down his own dictionary, because each one of us have our own backstory, so to speak, with all the words and the emotional triggers that relate to the words. Because when we talk in words, we're not necessarily conversing the best, because each of that means something to us differently than the other person because of our experience. So, right. Yeah. So I'm trying to. I've been looking at your website yesterday, and so I'm hoping to get more in it 2022, and understand. Yeah, I enjoy your work, so thank you. I know you're sincere.
Well, I appreciate you being interested in my work, Christopher, and thank you for asking a good question today. So what do we do about the mask? Well, we recognize that, yes, sometimes we have multiple personalities. We don't have to be like really having multiple personality disorder. It's just sometimes we have, one way that we appear to one person and another way we appear to others. Well, in a sense, we can say these are different facets of the same mask. It may be kind of two-faced or maybe duplicitous sometimes, but the idea is not to judge ourselves, The idea is just to recognize that different people may perceive us differently from different vantage points. Okay, not a problem. What we think of ourselves, our identity, is what we're mostly talking about. We're talking about identity because that's what we can change. We can change how people perceive us too, but that's much more challenging and takes a lot more effort. And sometimes it's not really a worthwhile endeavor to begin with. But what we think of ourselves is really that much more important, because that gives us the key to the kingdom, so to speak. It gives us the ability to institute the change within ourselves. As we start making the changes, we want to check, well, am I on the right track? For example, if I realign my values with being, for example, more honest, does it make me feel easier to breathe, or does my breathing becomes more stifled? Well, I just had this sigh, so I know, for example, for me, being more honest works better. It's more in alignment with my primary values. For example, if I decide to be trickier, more sneaky in my business, and maybe do some bait and switch kind of tactics in some aspects, how does it make me feel? Does it make me feel like my breathing becomes easier? No, actually kind of creates a little bit of tension in my throat. Oh, okay, well then it gives me a clear sense that perhaps duplicity is not my style. Okay, so it basically
That's
creates that kind of sense of authenticity that is precious. You cannot buy it, you cannot find it anywhere else other than within yourself. And that's what we're learning. We're learning how to become that authentic by paying attention to ourselves, by accepting what we are first, and then experimenting, well, what else can I be? How else could I manifest myself if I'm a dream character in this big dream drama called life? What would I identify with consciously if I had a choice? And we do have a choice, so we learn how to identify consciously with the values or attitudes or traits of character that we particularly resonate with. Isn't that empowering? It literally gives you the key that unlocks the door to manifesting and living your dreams. And that's exactly what I hope that we all will be doing in next year, 2022. We don't have to wait till then. We can get started now, but we have a lot of opportunities that are going to be coming up next year, and I will look forward to it. If you have any questions about anything we talked about today, anything you wish we talked about and we didn't, or perhaps anything you wished we didn't talk and we did, feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you want. Saved a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of our clinic, so feel free to unmute yourself. If you have any desire to receive a little coaching, feel free to raise your hand and I will coach one or two people before we wrap up for today. Valerie, yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, there. Well, I was thinking about everything you were saying, and I was thinking about there's like aspects of our personality sometimes that are so ingrained and maybe 40, 50 years carried around that we don't know how to be that other person, okay, that like the better version, okay. And I was thinking about like a lot of times if I was like feeling frustrated a lot or angry a lot, then if I didn't know how to be a more peaceful person, I would use a visualization of a peaceful place like an ocean or some place that made me relax. And by visualizing that for 10 minutes, then I get to feel what peaceful feels like. And I wanted to know what you thought about that idea and how you might use that. Would that
Oh,
apply to what you're
very good
saying
idea.
to shift our personality?
Yes, it's a very good idea. It's very much in alignment with what we were just talking about. In other words, I would use acceptance first. I would look at myself, my behavior, or my reactions, and I would totally accept them. Okay, this is how I acted. I don't want to act this way, but I fully recognize that this is how I have been. Let's take a look at where does it come from. Just trying to be different without addressing the root causes sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. So if I was, for example, bullied at school when I was a kid, and I developed a sense of anger about that or resentment, well, perhaps I can actually remember what it was like to be resentful or angry at some of the kids, and then remind myself, okay, this is a dream. In this dream, I have the freedom to keep doing the same thing and maintain that same sense of resentfulness, or I can experiment with something else. What other ways could I be in, or what other energies would I be able to channel through me? That's where that visualization of a peaceful ocean, for example, may come handy, because that may give me the access to those energies that provide me the example of peaceful responsiveness rather than reaction, for instance.
Yeah.
Now, it may be even more efficient to have a role model. We talked briefly today about being role models, but we also can use others as role models. Do I know anybody who exhibits that quality of character that I am looking for, or I would like to create myself? Now, let's imagine being able to perceive the energy of that person, just like looking at that person from a fly on the wall point of view. And the fly doesn't pay attention to the appearances, it only pays attention to the energy of the person. What aspect of that person's energy is responsible for that particular quality? Now, the fact that we are even interested in it means that we already have at least the seed of that energy somewhere within ourselves. It's just not a predominant force yet. So then what we do is we can do one of two things. We can either borrow some of that energy from the role model, if they have such an abundance of that particular energy of the supporting the trait of character. Well, perhaps we can borrow some of that energy from them and bring to the present moment where we are located, and actually paint our energy bubble, like the aura or field of energy around us, as if it's an energy bubble. We can actually imagine it having different colors, like a soap bubble, have different colors and different sides of it. Well, which particular color would be particularly associated with this trait? Or if we don't find that color, fine, let's just bring the energy that we borrowed from that role model, as if it's the energy paint, and paint this bubble in that color. So when we look through the walls of the bubble at the world around us, we actually see it through that filter of perception that allows us to step into that sense or that emotional or mental state. That's one way. Another way, if we already recognize that we have that trait within ourselves, just it's not highly developed, it's not our predominant driving force, we empower that existing energy within ourselves, practice putting it in the driver's seat, making it our driving force. How do we do that? We remind ourselves, let me exercise this particular trait now. It's like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it, or at least it doesn't become any more stronger. But the more you exercise that particular trait of character that is helpful, that is appropriate in this particular situation, it becomes more and more predominant. In other words, your neural pathways become more developed to default to go to that particular part of your brain and trigger that specific state or emotion.
Excellent. Your insight and depth is beautiful. Really,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Well, it was a great question. Did I answer your question? Do you have any others?
I'm good, thank you.
You're so welcome. All right. Any other questions or comments, folks? I'm happy to answer any questions or receive your comments. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, if there are no comments or no more questions, I want to thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate you. I send you lots of love and greetings for the holiday season, whichever holidays you celebrate. I wish you happy holidays, and I will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. We literally are going to have a Qigong Coaching Clinic. I believe it's going to be the 1st of January. The Saturday, 2 weeks from now, I believe it's the 1st of January. So guess what? We're going to hit the ground running. We're going to start the year strong. I will look forward to seeing you then. Until then, namaste.